Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Kicking It podcast. As always, my name's Liam, and if you're new to the podcast, we're talking, any recent news, any tournament performances, anything that's outstanding, or players that we've been seeing that have been doing well or not been doing well, and my thoughts, and also your thoughts if you put them in the comments below, which is always great. And yeah, this is episode 6. 2 weeks ago, we had a very good episode. We were talking about the Masters 1000 possibility in Saudi Arabia. But this week's podcast is going on about the performances of certain players at Indian Wells. And, some great performances, some not so great performances, some performances where maybe we're judging a bit too hard, and also some performances where maybe you say, it's a shame that this is the way that this player's career seems to be going. I've got a long list of players I want to go through with you guys. And, as always, if you enjoy the content that we put out here on the channel and on any podcast platform that you're listening to this, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. It really helps us grow the quality shot tennis community. And someone who's using that growing factor, someone who should be trying to grow their ranking points, but isn't right now, is Alexander Zverev. I mean, Zverev has had, he had a great 2024 season. Coming into 2025, playing some incredible matches at the Australian Open, reaching the final, losing the final in 3 sets, unfortunately, to Jannik Sinner. We would have hoped, no matter who wins the match, that it would have been a 4 or 5 set type match. And it's one of those things where he's got the tennis that he needs. He's got the level of tennis that he needs to beat anyone in the world at any time. But post the Australian Open, he's reached sort of, I would say, he's gone back into that passive playing phase, that passive tennis phase where he's not really trying to win the point. He's trying to just not lose the point. He doesn't go for the winners. He's serving. He's not getting as many free points on his serve. He's not being that confident. I mean, he's been consistent in getting it in, but he's not been that consistent in getting a lot of free points off of it. He's allowing the opponents to dictate the play a lot more than he's dictating the play. And that's really his downfall. I mean, we saw that in 2020. We saw that in 2019. We saw that in 2021. We saw that in 2023. I would put an asterisk. I'd put an asterisk in 2023, realistically, just because of the fact that, he's coming back from a massive injury. So he's just trying to find his level. But then in 2024, great tennis, great level, really showing us that he's back and he's here to make a name for himself. Starts 2025 off great, making another slam final. Get close to that world number 1 spot. Obviously not that close, but just not your world number 2. There can be a way to world number 1. It's not that impossible. His biggest opponent in terms of the threat to number 1, obviously being the number 1, gets a 3-month ban. What more could you ask for in terms of a perfect opportunity to maximize your ranking points? And their ranking points for their opponent are actually going down slightly because they're missing 3 months of tournaments where they've done well over the last year. The Golden Swing, when he played there, not really getting past the second round or the quarterfinals of a 250. I mean, nothing. That's not great. Coming into Indian Wells, he loses in the second round, which is his first match technically because he's the top seed. Not great. I do understand he did play against Talon Griekspoor, and Griekspoor is not an easy opponent at all. Griekspoor is one of those opponents where he makes you play everything. He makes you work like hell. He makes you win the point twice, 3 times. He is just consistent. He's fast. He's determined. He can have some matches where, of course, his level goes down, but realistically, he's got that level where he's had a lot of big wins over the last year. And obviously he's beaten Sasha before. So coming into this match at Indian Wells, I've beaten him before. I can do it again. It was a very tight match nonetheless, 7-6, 7-6, 7-5, all that stuff. But the fact that he can get through a tight match like that against the number 1 seed shows some great stuff from Talon. It does show that Zverev needs to really, really, really ramp up his game, ramp up his aggressiveness, ramp up his mentality, because he even said in the press conference after his loss that, he's not really looking at that number one spot anymore because he's not playing a good level of tennis. He's not confident in his tennis. You just made the final of the Australian Open. The confidence can be there, so he needs to really pick himself up mentally, get his tennis going again, and hopefully he can get some points under his belt in Miami. Going into the clay court season, he's never really performed that well in Monte Carlo, so he can grab a few points there. Obviously, he never reached, he can get himself into the semis or into the final of Monte Carlo, get a fair few amount of points under his belt there. Madrid, he's played very well in the past. He's won it before. Same thing with Rome. So he can get some more points under his belt there, because also when you look at the fact that he is going into the French Open, he's going into the French Open with 1,200 points to defend. It's a tough one. And depending on how the draw comes out and which side he falls on, if you're telling me he's playing Carlos Alcaraz in the quarterfinals, or the semifinals of the Australian of the French Open, do I realistically think he's going to beat Carlos Alcaraz in a best of 5 set match on clay nowadays? Not really. He did beat Carlos in Roland Garros in the past, of course. After Carlos, beat him like 6-1, 6-2 in the Madrid final that year, but. We're talking about 2025 now. We're not talking about 2022 anymore. So, yeah, I think he has a lot of points to defend at Roland Garros. So if he can get himself a good cushion of points under his belt before then, definitely something he needs to do. But that level of tennis just hasn't been there so far post the Australian Open. Speaking of a player who hasn't managed to find his level, but also doesn't seem like he's going to be finding his level, unfortunately, and not for a good reason. We're talking about Nick Kyrgios. Nick Kyrgios, of course, there were rumors before the start of the tournament. There were rumors of, his discomfort of his wrist still being around. He did have to cancel or, finish one of his practices early because he was in visible pain of his wrist. And it's one of those injuries where, doesn't matter if you love the guy, doesn't matter if you hate the guy in terms of his tennis, doesn't matter if you love him or hate him in terms of his personality, what he says, how he says it, who he says it to. At the end of the day, he's one of those players who can beat anyone on any given day. He puts fans in the seats of the stadiums. He gets people to watch him on TV because he's that exciting to watch. Whether he wins or loses, it's going to be an exciting match sometimes. And you don't wish an injury upon anyone, no matter whether you like them or you hate them. And a wrist injury is really one of those injuries where it's so tough. It's really tough. It ended Dominic Thiem's career, and we all know how great Dominic was. Winning the US Open against Sasha Zverev, coming from 2 sets to love down, beating many times Nadal, Federer, Djokovic in big stages. I mean, you can't tell me a guy who, who's beaten Djokovic at the ATP finals, beaten Federer here at Indian Wells in the past, beaten Nadal on clay in big tournaments, and done it consistently, not just a one-off and see you done that. He's done it consistently, and a wrist injury completely messes up his career and forces him to retire because he no longer can find the confidence or the sort of feel of the ball that he used to have and the power off the shot. And Kyrgios has been, if you look at Kyrgios, he's been struggling with this injury for 2 years now, or a few years now, because, he had a great 2022 season, but ever since then, it's just been all been downhill. He was practicing very hard. He was doing a lot of physio, a lot of rehab, making sure he's getting himself back to his best. And it's a shame to see that, when he gets to the Australian Open, the wrist is hurting him a little bit, but also, he has that abdominal issue that forces him to go out of the tournament. Then he gets the time that he needs to recover, and now the wrist is flaring up again at Indian Wells. It's a big shame, and unfortunately, it's one of those things where you don't have I would say, a blueprint that fits every single player. When you're talking about a wrist injury, it can really mess up everything, because some treatments and some comebacks from some players will be better than others, and sometimes it just won't make sense to someone else. Why did this player come back and be able to get back to his form or even better compared to me, who's had the same injury, done all the same treatments? It's just one of those things where it's a very personal thing, and unfortunately for him, it seems like it's really taken a toll on his potential career comeback. And at the end of the day, how many times can you go through this before you start losing the motivation? You say, well, maybe I should be doing something else with my career. And obviously, Kyrgios did try and play his match at Indian Wells in the first round against Botic van der Zandschulp. Had to retire during the match. And, everyone was talking pre-match, oh, it'd be great if Kyrgios wins. We get a Djokovic-Kyrgios second round, blah, blah, blah. We didn't get that, but we did get a Botic van der Zandschulp versus Djokovic second round match. And unexpectedly to me, I mean, I was talking to Faizan, in one of our chats, and he was asking me what my opinion was before the match between Djokovic and Botic. I was like, no, I don't see any issues here for Djokovic. I haven't heard the end of it from Faizan. I mean, he's holding that one over me for now. And yeah, Botic has been one of those players where when he's on, he's on. He does have some peaks and troughs in terms of his performance, and I wouldn't say he's Mr. Consistent, but when he's on, he's on. He beat Carlos Alcaraz at the US Open in straight sets last year. I was there for that match, and as much as I love Carlos's game style, his mentality, how great he is on court, his potential, how nice he is to fans and everyone around the world. I wasn't, when I was watching that Botic Alcaraz match in person, I was like, this is amazing tennis from Botic, and you kind of did want to see him win, just because you were like, this level that he's playing after those first two sets, the level that he's playing here is so high that it'd be a shame for that level to go down, and he managed to sustain that level, which was great to see. Then, of course, he had a great win against Rafa Nadal at the Davis Cup, but of course, Rafa retiring obviously at the Davis Cup, so not really the level that you're saying. It's like, oh, it was a tough match for him. Rafa's wasn't the same Rafa that we all know and love on court. And then coming into Indian Wells, you didn't expect too much of him, but he really just controlled and dictated play against Novak. He didn't allow him any rhythm. That's one of those things I think that people underestimate about Botic sometimes. He doesn't give you rhythm. He really can. So when he's on, he can really just make you overthink your game plan, that you end up not focusing on your game plan A, game plan B, game plan C, because he puts doubts in your mind all around the place. And then what are you left with? And then he gets some big wins here and there. But, obviously he had a great win against Novak, but he lost in the next match. So as I said, you've got those peaks and troughs. So that's the story of Botic so far. I do have a bit of I wouldn't say issue, I would say more of opinion on the fact that, a lot of people are saying, after this loss for Novak against Botic, is like, oh, is Novak finished? Is this the start of the end? Is he a player where you really can say, oh, he's got that motivation or capability to go deep in these tournaments anymore? But those are fair questions. He lost in Doha, he's lost here in Indian Wells, but you're talking about a guy who's won 24 Grand Slams, has 40 Masters 1000 tournaments. I don't think he even cares how many 500 tournaments or 250 tournaments he has under his belt. And just reached the semi-finals of the Australian Open, where he played an incredibly tight first set against Sasha Zverev, and only had to retire after that first set because he had a massive tear in his hamstring. You can't be calling that guy washed or finished, in my opinion. I think he doesn't really care how he performs or whether he wins titles in a best of 3 set format at this point of his career. I don't think that's his main factor. Of course, it'd be great, if he wins a title at a 500 or a 1000. I mean, no one's going to say no to that. I mean, only someone with a very, very low IQ would say, nah, who cares about that? Let's forget about that. Djokovic would be very happy with it, but his main focus is on those Grand Slam tournaments, those best of 5 set matches. And you look over a 1 year period. Okay, let's disregard the Australian Open last year where he lost to Sinner. I mean, losing to Sinner in 4 sets, with Sinner's form, not a bad thing. Goes into the French Open and has another injury, and he has an injury on his knee that requires surgery, and he had to retire against his match in his match. He lost his match, sorry, against Francisco Cerundolo, and then a month later he's at Wimbledon making the final. Still, after that surgery on that knee, then goes back to Paris at the French Open site, wins the Olympic gold against Carlos Alcaraz. That's a big toll mentally for you, to finally achieve that lifetime goal, or trajectory of reaching that final, and having so much pressure on you to win that gold, and he does it. You can expect a slump afterwards, of course, and goes into the US Open and loses against Alexei Popyrin. I mean, that's not a bad season for me. That's not a bad season. You lose against the champion at the Australian Open. You lose you lose a match at the French Open, but you had to have surgery on your knee right after because you've torn something. You go into Wimbledon with just after surgery, make the final. You go back to win the Olympic gold, and you go to the US Open, and okay, you have a bad performance at the US Open. I mean, give me that year. I mean, make that be my year if that's considered a bad year, and I consider it a great year. It's all about perspective. So coming into 2025, reaching the semis of the Australian Open, losing to Zverev, but not losing, retiring against Zverev because you have a hamstring tear, going into Doha, okay, whatever, you lost in Doha, coming into Indian Wells, okay, you lost in Indian Wells, but Botic played an absolutely incredible match. I don't think going into the clay court season, going into Miami first, but then going into the clay court season and the grass court season, I'm not worried for Novak. I don't think people should be that worried. I think when it comes to slams, he will do just fine. And people need to give a little bit more credit where credit's due in that sense. And that's coming from me, who's a big Nadal fan. I'm a huge Nadal fan. He's my favorite of the big three, and I'm saying Novak is, you got to give credit to Novak where credit's due. So I wouldn't overthink this loss to Botic. I just think I would take it as a Botic played incredibly well. I understand when Djokovic is playing against Alcaraz or playing against Sinner, if he loses those matches, those are the matches you say, okay, well, those are the ones where he's most likely going to be playing against one of them when he gets to a slam final. So those are the ones where you need to be worried, like, can he get over the line against them? But if he loses to Botic van der Zandschulp in a match, I would consider that an anomaly. Okay, I would consider that an anomaly, and I wouldn't say it's something I would be too worried about. So that's the Djokovic side of things. Speaking of a player who hasn't really had that great of a level so far this season, lost a fair few matches, somewhere he should have been winning them, is Daniel Medvedev. But here in Indian Wells, the expert hard court player / expert clay court player, if he still considers Indian Wells a clay court, and obviously has won Rome in the past, has been doing really well. I mean, that match against Arthur Fils in the quarterfinals, just incredible stuff. And the way he celebrated at the end was you've never seen him celebrate that much after a win. Even when he won a Grand Slam, he didn't. Okay, he did the fish celebration at the US Open, but jumping around that much after a win in the quarterfinals against Arthur Fils just shows how much pressure he's been under in terms of his game and his mentality, especially so far this season. So it's great to see him back into the semifinals. I'm excited to see, hopefully he can push himself back into another final, make it 3 finals in a row, and maybe get himself over the line. But it's a tough semifinal lineup that there is here so far in Indian Wells. Obviously you've got Holger Rune against Daniel Medvedev, and you've got Jack Draper against Carlos Alcaraz. I mean, it's sort of two players, you've got Medvedev and Alcaraz who've made the final the last 2 years in a row here, and Alcaraz has won both of them. And you've got two players in Rune and Draper. Rune, of course, who's not found that consistency that he's needed in his tennis to show us the levels that won him Paris Bercy in the last few years. And then you got Jack Draper, who has had so many injury issues so far that it's great to see finally a run in a tournament where he's getting deep and he's managing to sort of stay somewhat in control of his body. He's had a fair few quick, you would say quick, but straight set wins here so far. And the ones where it hasn't been straight sets, I mean, doesn't really matter, but he beat Taylor Fritz in straight sets. He beat Zhao Fonseca straight sets. Those are good wins to get yourself under your belt in straight sets. So going into that match against Carlos Alcaraz, it'll be good to see finally a matchup between these two where one of them isn't hurdled by something else. Obviously having had their match at the Australian Open where Draper had to retire, unfortunately. So it'll be great to see. And then obviously you've got Holger Rune against Daniel Medvedev, where Rune is going to be trying to make a statement to the tennis world, be like, I'm still around, don't forget about me. But it's going to be tough against Daniel Medvedev, who stands so far behind the baseline, gives you nothing, makes your margins so much smaller, and makes you hit so many more balls than you're used to over a long match. Where Rune sometimes can have those moments in matches where he pulls the trigger a little bit too early, and against Medvedev, who stands so far back and is so quick around the court, it's a tough one. It's a tough pill to swallow, just because it's one of those things where if you're losing to Daniel Medvedev in a Masters final on clay like he did in Rome, I'm going into this match more towards the Medvedev favoritism side of things, just because I think Medvedev has been a lot more consistent than Rune over the last year and a half, even though Medvedev hasn't even been that consistent. Tells you everything you need to know. Hopefully it's a great match, and I don't mind whoever wins it. And same thing for the Carlos Alcaraz Jack Draper one. But I would like to see a three-peat of Medvedev versus Alcaraz in the final here in Indian Wells. That's my prediction in any case. I think Alcaraz does come through probably in three tight sets against Draper, because if Draper is in good form and doesn't have any injury issues or concerns and manages to serve extremely well in a set consistently, definitely can get a set under his belt, especially for a tiebreak. But I think Medvedev in the Medvedev Rune match, I think Medvedev might see himself get through that one in like a 6-4, 7-5, 7-5, 7-5, 7-5, 7-6, something like that. I think he can do it in straight sets. So yeah, I'm predicting here that Medvedev and Alcaraz make the final of Indian Wells, and depending on how those semi-finals go, and if they actually do make the final, we'll see who wins it. But it's most likely going to be Carlos, just because of the fact that even after his match in the quarterfinals, he's like, should I buy a home here? Because you might as well. I mean, it's a second home at this point. That there in Wimbledon. I mean, back-to-back titles in the last 2 years in both of those tournaments. He's feeling the conditions really well, and he's hitting the ball extremely well there as well. So that's something which you wouldn't say it's an easy feat to do, but it seems extremely easy for Carlos so far at Indian Wells. Is one of his favorite tournaments. So I think he probably wins the tournament, and I think Alcaraz and Medvedev meet in the final. But it's great to see, Rune and Draper make the semis and really get their seasons sort of progressing well. Those are all the topics I wanted to touch upon today for the podcast. And again, thank you all for listening. Please, as I said earlier, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Really helps us grow the Tennis Shot Tennis community. And with that, I appreciate everyone. And leave a comment below if you have any questions or topics you want us to touch upon. It's great always to see the comments and go through them. And yeah, with that, I'll let you guys get back to it. Thanks.